They told us the worst sounds in prison were the screams. They lied. The worst sound is the quieter one, the smile that comes without a face. I remember the night it began, as clearly as I remember the chip of concrete that cut my palm the day I arrived. The block smelled of bleach and iron, like a hospital that had given up pretending to heal. Lights hummed on a 30-second cycle above the corridor, throwing the bars into brief rectangles of white. I had learned how to sleep standing up, how to pretend the scratching in the radiators was nothing more than mice. Routine is what keeps you alive in a place that tries to swallow you whole. Routine and the fact that you can count the steps between the gate and your cell. That night, the routine missed a beat. It was a whisper at first, the sort of tiny thing you try to explain away. A laugh, half smothered behind the plaster walls. A glimpse of movement in the gap beneath the door that looked like a shadow but smelled like old cigarettes, and something else, something sweet and rotten at once. My cellmate Marcus rolled over and didn't stir. He'd been sleeping like the dead for weeks. He'd say he couldn't get warm. I should have checked on him. I didn't. In prison, you ration your curiosity. It escalated in small, precise ways. The water in the sink would run cold in the morning, no matter how hot I turned the tap. My toothbrush would be shifted a finger's breadth to the left. Someone, or something, took care to leave signs. A thin, chalky symbol on the underside of the table where I could only see it if I knelt. A faint pattern like interlocking keys and crosses that made my teeth ache to look at. I began to find small, impossible things in my bunk. A single white tooth, a smear of black paint that smelled like nothing and everything. They felt like messages that I had no right to receive. At first I blamed the guards, blamed other prisoners. You learn to lay the blame on people. It's easier to face a person than a pattern. But then I started seeing the smile. It would arrive between the lights. A pair of eyes too dark for a human shape, and a mouth that widened in the corners, not with joy but with calculation. A grin stretched into something surgical. It sat at the end of the corridor, like a photograph come to life, and every time I squinted, it seemed to move closer, not by walking, but by the way the light bent around it. Once, on the night count, I locked eyes with it through the bars and watched teeth that were too many for any human jaw, gleam like keys under a torch. I told myself I hallucinated. I told myself it was stress, the food, the convulsions of sleep deprivation. But in the morning, the chalky symbol had been smeared into a perfect crescent on my pillow, and the mattress was damp with something that smelled like the inside of a mouth. When the gate rattled open at dawn, I thought it was the usual clank. Then the watchman shouted something. Not an order, not a call, but a single name. My name. In a voice that knew the map of me better than I did. My pulse dropped into the soles of my feet. I realized I had only one way out of the block, and whatever was smiling in the dark knew every step. After the dawn shouting, nothing stayed ordinary. The block folded in on itself like a bad dream. Men I had known for years began to move with a timing that was wrong, a beat late, a laugh held a breath too long. Conversations collapsed into holes I couldn't bridge. Sometimes a sentence would trail into the pipes and return altered, ending in a hiss that tasted like rust. I tried to keep my head down, to memorize the smell of the corridor, the exact place the light pooled on the floor. But the smile carved a road through everything. It learned to speak. At first, it was mimicry, the whisper of my mother's voice in the laundry room, the bark of a guard I had heard the week before. It used what it had heard against me, folding them like paper figures and setting them on my pillow. One night it called from under the bunk in Marcus's voice, soft and coaxing. "Open up, boy." I crawled into the crawl space on instinct, the way you respond to a familiar hand reaching for you in the dark. There was only damp concrete and a scrap of paper with my name written backward. Marcus was gone from his bed. The pillow was warm. They searched Marcus for a day and called it a runaway. The warden made a speech about consequences, and the men nodded with a practiced sorrow. Privately, they told me to mind myself. In the mess hall, a man at my table began to eat with a grin that didn't belong to any face I'd seen before. His lips stretched too wide, and the bread fell away like a curtain. He looked at me, and the room contained only the sound of his chewing, an interior chewing, like something inside his skull gnawing at a bone. When I cut my eyes toward the exit, the grill bars were dark as teeth. I tried to fight it with logic. I recorded the corridor on my phone during lights out, thinking an open lens would catch something that my eyes denied. When I played it back the next day, the footage showed me asleep on my bunk, breathing steadily. After 10 seconds, the screen trembled and a face leaned close, a face with no eyes, only hollows. Then the grin filled the frame. But there was a detail the playback didn't catch. In the top corner, for 3 frames, my mouth moved while I lay still. When I scrubbed the clip frame by frame, there was nothing else. No trick of editing. Just me opening my mouth into a sound I did not remember making. People stopped asking questions after that. Paranoia spreads in prison like a fire, fast with a hungry wind. Men stopped locking their doors at night and left bowls of water on their steps, as if to appease a god. The guards walked their rounds, but at odd angles, as if they were following a map drawn by someone else. Once one of them tapped my shoulder and smiled, and his teeth were a perfect row of white like piano keys. He said, "You shouldn't be awake," and his voice folded into the pipes and came back as a child's giggle. The next morning there were marks on the wall, hundreds of tiny teeth pressed into plaster. At the center of them, a single nail hammered into the concrete with something looped around it, a torn scrap of Marcus's shirt with a smile stitched into the fabric in black thread. I found my fingers tracing the thread before I knew I had done it. The smile felt warm beneath my nails. I held it to my face and tasted iron. When the lights went out that night, the corridor answered me by name and then by the sound that would not leave my chest. A laugh that was not laughter, but the precise, brittle sound of a mouth being forced open. The nights turned to a tightness behind my ribs, a muscle that clenched for hours and then refused to unclench. I began to count the ways the smile occupied space, the way it could hang on the back of a guard's head like a wet cloth, the way it could sit on a man's shoulder and hum as if it were a second heart. I stopped sleeping for longer than 2 hours at a time. In those thin hours, I rehearsed nonsense plans. A run at dawn, a bribe slipped into a palm, a confession shouted in the yard that would force someone to look up from their chewing long enough to see. None of them mattered. The morning Marcus disappeared, they printed his face and tethered it to the notice board. His eyes in the photo were dull, like 2 coins left in a puddle. I pressed my thumb into the grain of the paper until it tore and left a smear of ink. That night, I followed the corridor again with a borrowed flashlight, moving slow enough that the halo of light didn't smear into the dark. The smile watched me from the pool of the stairwell. It did not need to walk. It folded itself into the corners of the building, into the rusted hinges and the drainage grates, into the small, forgotten holes where pigeons nested and grief collected. I found the laundry room door ajar. A smell like warm bread and rot hit me, the smell of something fed too long on itself. On the folding table lay a book, a child's picture book, open to a page of teeth drawn like a chorus line. The edges of the pages were sticky. Written across the drawing in a hand that trembled between panic and devotion were the words, "We need mouths." My hands remembered Marcus's shirt on the nail, the black stitching of a smile. My throat constricted so hard I thought I would live the rest of my life holding it shut. They used sound now like a lever. At night, the pipes would chatter with my mother's lullaby and then snap into a chorus of teeth, clicking a rhythm I recognized in my bones. Once, near the infirmary, the intercom played the recording of my own laughter from a week prior, and then slowed it until it became a complaint, a thing bending under its own weight. I followed the sound into the dark and found a door I had never seen before, a service hatch hidden behind a narrow supply cabinet. It opened on its own when I shoved it, as if it had been waiting for me to have the courage to be curious. The room was small, windowless, chains hung from the ceiling like offerings. On a table lay a mirror, clean as an altar. When I looked into it, the light did not show my eyes at first. It showed the corridor, reflected endless and empty. Then my face wavered into being. My mouth moved before I could decide to move it. I watched my lips peel back into teeth I did not own, watched the skin around my mouth stretch with a patience I had not felt before. There was no pain, only a widening, like a door being unlatched. Something behind me, a pressure, a smile pressed into the small of my back, and I understood, in a sick, awful clarity, the smile had never been an outside thing that haunted the prison. It was a method. It found weaknesses and filled them, like water seeking low ground. It wanted mouths. It wanted bodies that could answer when it sang. I tried to pull away. My hands were clumsy, traitors with minutes left. In the mirror, my teeth were too many, too bright. I could feel my tongue becoming a tool. I could feel the grin learning the map of my jaw. They had called my name over the gate that morning with such knowledge because the smile had already taught them how to find me. It had taught them how to make me belong. When the hatch closed behind me, muffling the sound of the block, I thought of Marcus and of all the small signs I had ignored. I thought of the chalk crescent on my pillow and the nail in the wall and the way the world had rearranged itself into a mouth-shaped room. I pressed my lips together in a last attempt at choice, but the choice was gone. I opened my mouth because the smile had no patience for silence. I am the smile.